Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining another episode of the Educational Leadership Podcast. We have another very special guest. We have the Superintendent of Lockhart ISD in Texas, and we also have our co-host, Corinne Fridge.
Hey, I'm so excited for another great podcast. It's nice to see you, Mark. We're glad that you're here.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Yes, thank you for joining us. And before we jump into today's topic, just if you can, just share a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I've been the superintendent of Lockhart ISD. This is my fifth year as superintendent. Before that, I was a teacher and assistant principal and principal in a neighboring school district in Del Valley ISD, kind of Southeast Austin area. Transitioned over to Lockhart as a principal, and then was an assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction. And now the superintendent of schools here in Lockhart ISD, and love the community, love the area. Have 4 children who attend Lockhart ISD schools. So for me, everything that I do is for all kids, and I want to ensure that if it's not good enough for my kids, it's not good enough for anyone's kids.
Absolutely, I love that mindset. And so right now, what's going on in public ed that you're just passionate about, and where's your heart at right now in public ed?
That's a really good question, and I think right now there was a recent report from the Charles Butt Foundation that kind of captures the current climate in the state of Texas regarding teachers and kind of how they're feeling, and it's something that has been really heavy on my heart and on my mind. As I lead Lockhart ISD, but also as in a broader sense of public education in Texas, because if you've had a chance to look at the report, it tells a pretty bleak story about how teachers are feeling right now. Teachers are having a difficult time. It's a challenging job always. Right now, they're not really getting the support and don't feel the support, and that's from the legislative level and policy to to parents in the community, to principals, their colleagues, everything in between. So reflecting on that and looking at, okay, so we talk with our teachers, we do our own surveys, we have forums with them. How much of that is also in Lockhart? What things do our teachers share? And then are there any differences? So we've just been diving into that report, and I think that we have to, if we want to educate, the 5.5 million students in the state of Texas, we've got to have quality teachers to do that. And if teachers are leaving the profession, which we know they are, it's going to be very problematic, especially when you look at not only are they leaving at a faster rate, but the number of people who are choosing to teach as a profession and as a career, who are going to college, those numbers continue to dwindle. So there are less people coming into the pipeline and more people exiting, which is creating classrooms across the state that potentially aren't what's best for kids.
And I feel that in higher ed too, when we had the mass exodus of people leaving higher ed field also. And I'm wondering, one, do you feel like this year was harder than 2 years ago? Because I almost feel like, for me personally, when I was on a school board and then even in higher ed, and I feel like this year is really hard. It's almost harder than last year. And I don't know if that's a fair assessment, but I think what is on my mind with this idea of teachers leaving is, when is it enough to keep telling someone to hang on, just hang on, it's going to get better, the kids are worth it. And so I'm going to say something at risk of doing that, and then you tell me if this is worth it, to keep pushing on. We had 8th graders on campus the other day where I work, and this 8th grader was telling the story about wanting to basically create a space station. So his mind was there, he had all the ideas, but he didn't have some of the technical pieces. Of course, I didn't have an answer either, other than to just say, yes, you should do it. And he looked at me and he said, "You don't think that's stupid?" And he was so serious. And I said, no, it's not stupid. As a matter of fact, like, I bet you, like, there's someone who's working on that now. You should, if you're okay, your parents are okay, you should look them up tonight or whatever. And I wrote home and I wrote on my my notebook, like, our kids are still dreaming and they need adults who can meet them and help with that self-efficacy piece and help surround them. And so, like, for me, that was a boost. Like, okay, I'm going to keep doing it. Like, but is that enough to keep telling our teachers, like, they are making a difference? Like, what is that cheesy? Like, when
No,
is that?
I think that that teachers certainly need to hear that encouragement. Um, you know, absolutely, and I think especially when it's coming from a sincere place, teachers and any educator will certainly that goes a long way with them. I think most teachers have that folder with notes from students, from parents, from colleagues, from former principals, etc. That they go to when they need some encouragement, and they need some they need that little boost. Um, so I certainly think there's a place for that, and we must do that. I also think, though, to kind of counter that as well, we can't just depend on the why teachers got into this, which is to build relationships with kids. They want to make a lasting impact on someone's life. Um, like, we have to start doing real tangible things and not just assuming that teachers are going to continue to do the work because because they care for kids. It's almost this it's almost as if we're taking advantage of teachers because of why they get into this work. And I would go as far as saying sometimes, as a system, people can kind of exploit the goodwill of teachers because, well, do you care about kids, or do you want to raise? And it's not about that. Teachers feel like they should be able to make a living. They should be able to buy a house in the community that they live in. They should be able to save funds. They should be able to provide for their family. And the fact is, right now, especially um, in Central Texas and in more urban places, teachers cannot afford to be a teacher, because of the pay is not kept up with the increase in property values and or market rates of just to live in the areas that they live in. So I think that, while we need to continue to encourage them from a policy point, from a school funding perspective, we've got to support them to where they no longer have to make a choice on, do I have to live with roommates, and continue to be a teacher, or do I just leave public ed, go into who knows what other career that they can do, and be able to buy a house now, right? So and we're seeing people every year leave, not because they don't love working with students, but because they financially cannot afford to be a teacher any longer, and that is a huge problem that we're facing right now. You're seeing school districts now trying to, and ours included in Lockhart, we're trying to find affordable housing for them. We're paying gas incentives. We're being innovative with insurance, all because the basic allotment that we receive per student is not keeping pace with how much it costs to live in Central Texas. I know it's the same in many other places around the state. So that teacher pay issue is critical, and actually putting our money where our mouth is. Not just telling a teacher, "Oh, you're awesome, you're amazing, and I know you can't afford to live in the town that you work in, but keep it up." Like,
Right.
there's people. They're going to make decisions based on what their family needs, and that's what we're seeing across the board, across the state. People leaving in large numbers simply because they can't afford to be a teacher anymore.
Wow. Yeah, no, this is huge. This is very powerful. So I came from the corporate world before getting involved in public education. And so I left the Fortune 100 companies to try to give back, which is part of the reason why the podcast is here. And a big part of that is teachers. I have 3 kids in public school, and they're not given enough credit. I wonder, I know with big corporations, and comparing a school district to a corporation is probably not an accurate comparison, but there are levels of management, right? There's levels of leadership there. Um, Now, I know in the corporate world, asking employees that aren't in top leadership positions to really give candid feedback, like, hey, I need a salary increase, or hey, my leadership is not treating me how I want to be treated, or I feel like my voice isn't heard. Do teachers feel comfortable sharing that? Obviously, in the survey they did, but that was kind of a third party survey. Do teachers feel comfortable sharing that with upper leadership?
That's a great question. I think in my experience, a lot of teachers are fearful and like what they can share. Is someone going to find out, what I said? Those types of things are pretty normal. We've tried to create a culture here in Lockhart of where they can share what they're really feeling, that, they're not going to be retaliated against, those types of things. As I mentioned, we actually have twice a year teacher forums where myself and our board president, we sit down and we show up and we have our teachers come in, and they can, we always center it around something. We actually centered it around the survey, the Charles Butt survey a couple weeks ago. And just as a springboard into the conversation. And teachers will tell us what's working, what's not working, suggestions for how to improve, etc. But it's taken 4 or 5 years to get them comfortable with knowing that I can express myself and say what I need to say, and it's not going to be held against me in any way. And then we do, climate, culture and climate surveys, and the same thing. We've seen steady, over the last few years, more and more people taking it because they want to give us the feedback, and we've seen our culture improve. We've gone from like 70% of the people proud to work in our district to 90%.
Oh, congratulations. That's a big difference in a couple of years.
Yep.
It really is.
Our teacher retention has improved double digits to where, teachers are choosing to stay here. So those are all good signs of a shift in culture. But again, the culture piece is one reason, like, people leave their boss. They don't, we know that. But we can do all those things. And if people can't afford to live in Central Texas, they're still going to choose, to work somewhere else, or to leave public education in general, which is what they're doing. In a community like Lockhart, where about 70% of our teachers commute to work, because there aren't a lot of places to live here. It's a small town. So they live in Austin, they live in Kyle, Buda, San Marcos, Ruffles, etc. When gas prices are expensive, when their cost of living goes up, they're having to make some hard choices. So we have to do everything possible to keep them connected and to feel a part of our district. So we work very hard to do that.
So for the retention over the 2 years, going from 70% to 90%, you did the focus groups with the focus on the surveys, and what are some other things that were implemented?
Sure. So you actually kind of mentioned one of the things we've done is to try to build more leadership opportunities for teachers in a smaller district like ours. We were seeing that some people felt like there weren't a lot of opportunities to grow. So we've created some leadership pipelines for people. We call those positions lever leaders, and it's part of a shared leadership model. Actually, you mentioned Holdsworth earlier. We were part of the Holdsworth leadership program, district leadership program. So we've been working on this for 5 years now. But it's all about sharing leadership at the district level, at the campus level, so that teachers feel empowered, that teachers feel like they're making the decisions that affect them and their everyday work experiences. And then also, secondly, creating career advancement opportunities to where they have chances to grow, and then also to be compensated for that. We have teachers right now who get paid more than assistant principals because of their years of experience, and they don't have to leave the classroom.
That's excellent.
Yeah, it's a different way to think about compensation, but we want to keep our best in the classroom that want to stay in the classroom. We have a pathway if people want to be administrators where they can get at bats and opportunities to grow there. But we also have pathways for people who want to stay in the classroom and just and are master teachers and deserve to have some of the shared leadership to make decisions about curriculum, instruction, professional development, assessment on their campuses, and to help craft those things with the campus leadership team. So that we are in our third year of those positions that we funded, and all but six of our 9 campuses have a shared leadership model and the staffing associated with that. Next year, we'll add another campus or 2. And then in 2 years, 100% of our campuses will have a shared leadership model and the resources and funding to support those new positions for people who want to grow in their leadership.
That is so impressive. I'm wondering, like, did you all learn that model from Holdsworth, or how? And then how would a small district, and how will other districts could they incorporate that, follow your lead?
Yeah, so we part of the Holdsworth experience that were transformational for me as a leader. One was our trip to Singapore. So we took a trip to Singapore to learn their educational system, and one of the things that I walked away from that was the career pathways that people had, and then the compensation structure around that, to where, in Texas, unfortunately, a lot of times if you want to earn more salary, you have to go into administration, you have to become a teacher or central office, those types of things. When Singapore, it's not like that. They reward teacher expertise, they with compensation. So that was a huge learning experience that helped us craft our model, as well as we went to Toronto and learned about their structures as well. And those 2 experiences help kind of craft our shared leadership model that we have here in Lockhart. And absolutely, I think that we're showing that with in a district of 6,500 students, that you can create this. You don't have to be this large urban district to have growth opportunities. You can do it in a smaller district with some creativity, with a willingness to give up some control at the central office, because that's a lot of it is us as district leaders understanding that if we're going to empower people, it's going to cause us to change on how we do business as well. So that was a big culture shift that we're going through.
I love that you use the word control, because I think what the importance of local control, to be able to take into your own hands the ability to create the change you needed in your system, and not be so dependent on waiting for something else to change above you. Because I think that's the part about system change. It's so hard, is that you're still part of a larger system, and we want to be. I mean, I want to be connected. I want my students to be connected to the larger state system, and we want some part of that, but we need that local control. So that's so impressive that you're able to do that. I have kind of a personal question on that. Was it hard to get the board to buy in on that, or were they talk about board buying in? Because I think
Sure.
not buy in, but like just the board getting behind that, and how you navigated that, because I think that could be difficult at times to make a change, like, because you still have 7 other people.
One of the things that I'm very blessed to have a board that trusts the expertise of the school district, and we have very clear roles and responsibilities. So a lot of it, that autonomy was kind of there already, and trust was there. But in terms of really getting the board to see the vision, because they were going to have to fund some of these positions, right? It's a budgetary thing. To really understand that what it was about was really on the values that we say we have for people of, we want to unlock everyone's potential. We're locked on excellence, and we have a Lockhart for people, and really grounding what we were doing on those values that the board helped create, right? And said that this is what the district is about. Really garnered their support pretty quickly of, okay, so now they can make sense of why we're changing our system, and having, clearly articulating. And the board really, they wanted to see, okay, so I need to understand what is loose and what is tight. So what are we relinquishing and what are we keeping, right? And being able to explain that on a high level, I think was helpful to understand that it's not a free for all. We're still a system, and we have high expectations, and there's some tightly held practices that that we'll continue to have as a district. But these are the things that we're going to have some autonomy at the campus level as well, and them kind of understanding what those loose and tight systems were, I think was helpful.
I love that. I know Gary's going to want to ask a question about innovation and change, and then but loose and tight. What is loose and tight? I love that. That is because sometimes people want the once they know that, then it might be easier to make another decision that they don't understand, because often board members won't understand. They're not in public ed, and they might not understand the structure even of how a teacher might want to stay a teacher or need to move up to master teacher. These are all words that people who aren't in public ed, we can't always expect them to know. And so I love that you're saying like what's loose and tight, because it's like the top.
Sure.
Like, I
Yeah,
love that's a great.
I think whenever you're talking about change and change leadership, you have to really understand what you're changing, why you're changing it, and clearly articulate to the people that you're working with on the language that you're using. And when I say loose and tight, I like really those are who can make decisions. What autonomy do you have to make decisions, when you can make it. That's what I mean by loose and tight, to where we clearly articulate where a teacher can decide how they're going to teach fractions, even maybe when they're going to teach it, as long as they're within our broader scope and sequence, and they understand that they're going to take this assessment within this time period. Whatever you need to do to teach our students so that they're ready for that assessment that is tightly held, right? You have to give it in this 2-week window. At some point, I don't care if it's day 1 or day 10, you decide, but our students will take that assessment, right? And then even within that assessment is loose and tight, because you have teacher teams who are going to create that assessment, right? So the tight is teachers will make our assessments, period. We're not going to allow central office to go buy something, right? The decision is made. And as long as you involve teachers, that's good. And then the loose part is they can create the test as they see it. If that's going to be multiple choice, that's going to be a written response. It's going to be a performance task. We don't necessarily care, because we've had that conversation about what we care about, and we can articulate what's really tight, and then everything else people who's doing the work can decide. And whenever you're able to do that, I think it actually gives them more creativity, because they understand, okay, so this is kind of the boundaries, and then we can go from there.
That's wonderful.
Yes, no, this is really good. And I know we're running short on time. So we've talked kind of big picture, some strategy, some tactical items for a district that's trying to get started and really embracing their teachers and showing support and improving teacher retention. What's that first step, kind of going from 0 to 1 type of scenario? What's the first step you think they need to take?
Oh man, that's a good question. I think you really have to be you have to be willing to listen. And I think that's that first basic step as a leader. If you're not going to listen to your staff, then don't waste their time. If you're going to sit there and make excuses of why something can't be done, or try to explain why the district did something, like, keep your mouth closed, listen, actually hear the people, understand what their needs are, because that's the first step to addressing the issues that you may have in your district, is being quiet, listening. And I'll be the first to admit, like, I have to tell and remind myself, when someone says, well, why do we have to do this? And sometimes I want to say, well, no, you don't have to, or this or that, or this is why we do it. And you just have to listen and be very open to taking the good and the bad and everything in between.
Awesome. No, that's perfect. So for those listening in, you have that first step, and we're all people. We need to listen to each other. And Corinne, any last thoughts before I give a shout out to our sponsor and close out?
I'm so glad you asked because I do. Mark, what's your big ask for public ed right now? This podcast will be aired sometime in mid-November, so elections already happened, but we know that we're in this for the long haul with students. We're committed to public ed. So what's your big ask?
I think that it's not going to be a surprise as a superintendent, but we have to increase the basic allotment this legislative session. I think that with the state sitting on $27 billion in the surplus, there's no reason why the state of Texas cannot fund more appropriately public ed in Texas right now. Whenever you look at how Texas ranks in public education funding, we're always at the bottom. We're always in, 44, 46. And that to me is unacceptable. In a state that loves to publicly rank schools and say who's doing a good job, I think we have to look at the state. Well, how do we rank when we look at school funding and we know it's towards the bottom, and we've got to address that this legislative session.
We have the money. That's what makes no sense to me. I'm from a state, I was born in the Northeast, but a very poor state I'm familiar with in the Northeast. And it makes sense why some states don't fund public ed, but then ours just doesn't there's just something that just doesn't make sense in Texas. Yep. And so thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for being on our podcast today. I can't wait to see you again in person. And Gary, I feel like we have this mastermind idea that we want to bring our guests back on again. And I would love to have you go deeper with this loose and tight and explaining that. I think that would even be helpful for board members and people who are making decisions. I mean, that's such a good analogy. I thank you for sharing that today. I learned a lot myself.
Yeah, thank you. It was fun to be on the podcast. Let me know. I'd love to be back if you guys will have me.
Absolutely. Oh, I guess I can ask this short question. You want to give a shout out? Who are we shouting out to? Superintendent Estrada, who should come on the podcast next? We did this a while back. We need to do this more often.
I just got off the phone with Dr. Padavale and Taylor ISD. I don't know if you've talked to Devin yet. He's a superintendent colleague who, I really respect and learn from every time I talk to him. Really innovative, high energy. Just really focused on kids type of a superintendent who I think the world of. Give him a shout out, not just because I just got off the phone with him, but because he's one of those leaders across the state who's a superstar, and I think people can learn from him.
Thank you. I can't wait. I'll go look him up.
Awesome. Yeah, no, this is really cool. And thank you so much for everything you shared today, Superintendent Estrada. And thank you, Corinne, for being an awesome co-host. And before we close out, we're going to get a shout out to our sponsor, Ideal Impact. Speaking of funding, Ideal Impact is giving hundreds of millions of dollars to school districts around Texas. So far, they've worked with over 180 districts in Texas. Doesn't involve the government, doesn't involve taxpayers, and it's all in the form of a free gift. So if you'd like to learn more, check out Ideal Impact, or you can send me a message and I'll connect you to the right person. And for those that have been tuning in, stay tuned for future episodes of the Educational Leadership Podcast.